Okay, we are back. This is the reassembly portion of the Homelite 330. Uh, just wanted to do a quick note. Those are the reed valves. They look good on this saw, but you should always check these when you've got a saw apart, because if you miss it and put it all back together, it's a pain in the butt to get back to it. You're looking for chipped edges, broken areas, not seating flat. But those look phenomenal. So, let's start putting this back together. I've got the boot here, and that just slips right onto your reed valve here. And you've got your retainer that slips right over the top of that. And there's only one way that this can go. There's a notch cut out on this side of the reed so that you clock this properly. And if you try to put it in the wrong way, it won't drop down, and if you try and tighten it down like that, you're going to break it. So I recommend you find the right direction. Okay, nice and tight. The boot is self-sealing. It's a gasket material, so as long as you get it slipped onto that reed valve assembly properly, that's all you've got to do is get it in there. Now what I didn't do yet in all my cleanup was take the rest of the old boot out. But you can see how that has no rubber properties left. It's just a gooey mess. I've seen gooier, and that's the kind that likes to stick to your hand for 3 days. So you can see one new hose here. These other ones are fine, and with this reinforced one, I can't duplicate that. So if the original factory one is in good shape, I'm not going to replace it. That's always been my theory, is that it just doesn't make any sense to replace something that's not broken. So as soon as I figure out what the heck I did with my needle nose pliers here, we'll start getting this back together. Okay. Becomes a bit of a contortion to work around everything, but there we go. So when it comes to getting your new boot up into the carburetor chamber, you want to be careful, obviously. I mean, it's not so fragile that you can't work with it, but you don't want to go jabbing at it either. So you just want to kind of work its way up into the chamber here, and the chamber's got this groove that's designed to seal the boot to the chamber. So you got to get this in here and get it to lay flat without poking a hole in it. So there we go. And this is sitting above this gasket here, which is good. As the carburetor clamps down, it'll seal to that, and we'll be ready to rock and roll. So here's our new carburetor pulse hose. Fish that up through. And I've already installed a new hose in the fuel tank here. That's how that's going to fish up, is right like that. And that's not going to hang in place until I get this tank going here. So, let's see how ugly this gets. Say they always seem to go together easier than they come apart. You want to make sure your hoses end up staying where they belong, on the inside of this chamber, otherwise you'll get everything together and see a hose smashed on the outside, and then you get to start all over again. So guide that filler in. See how easy that went together? They never come apart that easy. I don't know, maybe if a person did enough of these, they would, but so I'm looking down and aligning these holes on the carburetor chamber. You heard that kind of drop into place. So let's go ahead and secure that right now since we're here. small screws, so you don't want to put a huge amount of torque on them. I've been using the rattle gun for a lot of years, so I know kind of what I can get away with and what I can't, but you really want to be careful with those. Alright, I'm going to put the oil pump in place too, so that it quits puking what oil is left in it as a prime all over my bench. And again, that gasket was still in place and in good shape, therefore it's not getting replaced. There are times that the old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, really is true. I do have customers occasionally that want brand new everything, but I remind them that they're basically paying for stuff that they don't need, because if it's not worn out, all you're doing is paying the ridiculous price that things cost today, and you're not really gaining any performance. So, okay, so that's in place. I think we ought to secure this tank down, so I'm going to dig these screws back out. One thing that I forgot to mention, on these AV mounts, make sure we're still, see if I can zoom in a little bit here. I have to unplug the camera. So pardon the shakiness and whatever else. Those AV mounts all have that steel band. That's a reinforcing strip. There's a steel insert that slides into it. You want to make sure those steel bands stay in place at all times. You don't want to assemble it without those, because it's not going to work as it's designed to work. So this upper one is the one that had the collars, cup washers, whatever you want to call them. So get those back into place. That's just snug. I want to leave a little bit of play in case I have problems with any of these other ones. Usually these aren't a big deal. Once you get it, yeah, see, that one started right away. Usually it'll drop right into place. Okay, and I'll leave those snug. Although, what the heck? There's no reason to not tighten them at this point. It's independent of the lower engine mount there. One less thing to forget. Okay, so there we are. Sure we don't get any garbage in our fuel tank. I've already gone through the carburetor. It did not need gaskets. Again, if it's not broke, don't fix it. These gaskets looked phenomenal. They were all very, very pliable. They were sitting the way they should. So I'm going to assume that when we go to start this thing, it's not going to be a hassle at all. So you've got to slide the carburetor to where the screws will start in the grommet there. You want that. There we go. And a good seal. That's part of keeping garbage out of your engine. Having a good seal around that carburetor box. Now this side with the choke plate on it here has a special washer, so you want to be careful not to mess that up, lose it. Make sure it's seated right, because when it tightens the carb down, it's leaving a little bit of slop, so this will actuate. And without a choke plate, you're not going to be able to start this thing very easily. Okay, so as I mentioned in the other video, you want your carburetor pulse hose to go first. We'll see. It's like I didn't leave quite enough out of the tank for the fuel side. Some people hook these up before you screw them down. I think it's just a personal preference. You definitely can get at this one barb a little easier if you do it that way. But okay, there we go. No kinks, it's nice and round. Right. It's going together way too easily, folks. Way too easily. Makes me wonder what I've forgotten. So I did hose everything out. The only thing I missed that I'm seeing here is the starter cover, and I'll catch that before we go to start this thing. Good time to get your ignition or your on-off switch wires back into place. They're formed by years of sitting there, so it'll be easy to tell which one goes on which tab, but realistically it's not a huge deal if they end up reversed. The biggest thing is you want to make sure that they stay away from the muffler. There's a shield right here, and there's extra insulation on this. That was a common problem. There'd be a no start on a 330, and it was the kill switch wire would get over on the muffler and short out. Alright, so here's our bottom housing. Just slip that over our spark plug there. Roll it up into place. Looks good. I can see that the hole's going to line up here, so I'm just going to set that loosely. We'll get these other screws in place. The 330 is not one of the biggest rattle traps, so to speak, that Homelite made. I'm looking for my Loctite at the moment. Before I can do too many more repairs, this workbench is going to have to get mucked out. This is ridiculous, to say the least. Ah, there we go. Why not under a guide bar? Like I was saying, it's not the biggest rattle trap in terms of liking to lose screws, but these lower engine housing screws are ones, if anything was going to come loose, this is where it would happen. So this is where you want to guide those straight up in until you feel them seat just a little bit, because they are a pain, as this one is demonstrating. Come on, you. Little devil. Alright, well, I'm going to pop this AV mount screw back out and back this off so that I can actually see the screws as they're starting. Usually they're not this big of a pain in the butt, but hey, two can play that game. So you don't want to get carried away when you're using Loctite either. That's a good way to seize screws up and get to the point where when you go to take them apart again, you end up with broken castings, and that's no fun. Some of these things are easy enough to put a helicoil in. That's really not the point. A helicoil is never as good as original metal. That's just the way it is. You don't want your Loctite to get on your body parts either, because especially these washer head screws, it'll glue them down very, very tight. And again, that's where you can end up with a broken screw. And that's a bad day. No matter how you cut it, that's not what you want. Okay, lower housing's in place. I'll get that AV mount screw in there, and that'll stiffen that up just a little bit. But these things did have a soft feel to them. This is only a 3-point vibration isolation system, but it did work. does work. For a 54cc engine, it's actually quite adequate. We've got this tilted. Let's go ahead and put our bottom strap back on here. Since this is a plastic part that the washers kind of sink into a little bit, don't see these rattle loose very often. Okay. That starter's horrible. I'm going to hose this off real quick, folks. And when I say hose it off, that's exactly what I mean. Water's not going to hurt your chainsaw. I mean, no, you don't want it to live in a river, and you don't want to soak the parts repeatedly and leave them wet, but for getting loose sawdust and stuff off, there's not a whole lot better than good old-fashioned water. And if you can hook up to your hot water, so much the better, because that'll cut through oily sawdust very, very quickly. Alright, for the test run, I'm not going to put the carburetor cover on it yet, because if there's a problem, that's just more work to get it back apart. Same thing with the front handle. There's no point in putting stuff in place that you would have to take off again until you know that the saw is going to run right. Okay. Well, I'm going to assume that it ran on this tune the last time that it was running. So we're going to try and start it on that. Hopefully this camera doesn't run out of memory. Good sign. Okay. Well, I'm going to say that it was tuned a little bit with the carb boot blown out, so I'm going to do a little work with it and we'll come back for the final test run video.